Today, we're going to tackle a really powerful and really complicated idea, race. We're going to dig into the surprising history of how this whole concept got built. And spoiler alert, it wasn't by biology. It was actually built by law and some pretty wild pseudoscience. And then we'll see what all that means for us now, in this new age of genetic engineering. So, let's start with something that might feel a little paradoxical. Just a few years ago, a survey found that more than half of Americans think their racial identity is literally written in their DNA. I mean, it makes sense, right? It's a really common idea, that our genes tell the whole story of our race.
But here's the thing. The actual science tells a completely different story. And this isn't just a theory, it's a fact confirmed by one of the biggest scientific projects ever. Genetically speaking, any two people on this planet, you, me, anyone, we are 99.9% identical. That tiny fraction of a percent, sure, that's what makes us all different. But it just doesn't line up with the categories that we call race.
So, that leads us to the big question for today. If science is telling us race isn't really a biological thing, then where did it come from? How did it become such a powerful force in our society? How was it invented? And why does it still have so much influence over everything?
Okay, let's get into it. We're going to look at how legal codes in colonial America actually created and enforced these racial divisions. And the answer, and this might surprise you, it doesn't start in a science lab. It starts in a courtroom. The whole concept of race, as we think of it, was literally built, piece by legal piece, to fix a big economic problem for the American colonies.
Picture this. It's the 1600s. The colonies are trying to make a fortune on tobacco, but they have a huge problem. They need a lot of cheap, stable labor. Indentured servants from Europe? Well, they were only temporary. And trying to enslave Native Americans just didn't work. They resisted, and they knew the land way too well. But then they turned Africans. From their perspective, it seemed like the perfect solution. They were more resistant to some tropical diseases, and this part is key. Their skin color made them easy to identify. It made it almost impossible to escape and just blend in.
And then came this one legal decision in 1662 that changed everything. See, Virginia decided to ditch English common law where a kid's status came from their father. Instead, they adopted this old Roman rule called partus sequitur ventrum. And all that means is that a child's legal status, whether they were free or enslaved, was now inherited from their mother. And just like that, the children of enslaved women were automatically born into slavery no matter who their father was. This created a system that fed itself, a permanent and incredibly profitable workforce.
And believe it or not, that was just the start. Over the next 100 years or so, law after law was passed, building these walls of race higher and higher. In 1664, Maryland literally enslaved white women who married black men. Then in 1705, Virginia doubled down, making it clear that children of African women were servants, period. Fast forward to 1785, and Virginia comes up with the infamous one-drop rule. If you had even a single black ancestor, you were legally black. This whole legal framework even got baked into the U.S. Constitution with the Three-Fifths Compromise. You see, race was literally being written into the DNA of the country's laws.
All right, on to the false science of division. We're talking about how pseudoscience was used to justify a social order that was already there. So once the legal walls of race were built, a new mission started, to make it all seem, well, scientific. Science, and I'm using heavy air quotes here, was basically weaponized to back up the system that the laws had already put in place.
This is where all sorts of pseudosciences pop up. One of the biggest was something called craniometry. And the idea was, well, it was as simple as it was wrong. They believed you could figure out everything about a person, how smart they are, what their character is like, their entire value, just by measuring their skull.
And of course, the conclusions they reached with this science were pretty horrifying, and they were basically decided from the very beginning. You had proponents like this surgeon, Josiah Clark Knott, using his skull measurements to argue that black people were not only less intelligent, but that they actually reached their greatest perfection in a state of slavery. I mean, it's just a shocking thing to read. It was a very deliberate, calculated move to give a brutal economic system a scientific-sounding excuse.
Then there was another one that got super popular, phrenology. This was the idea that every single mental trait you have, whether you're good at music or supposedly prone to crime, lived in a specific spot in your brain, and a phrenologist claimed they could read your whole personality and your future just by feeling the bumps on your head. Seriously.
So, let's be crystal clear. These theories were total nonsense, complete fabrications. There was zero real science behind them. But they were incredibly powerful. Why?
because they gave people what felt like scientific proof for the prejudices they already had. In an era that worshipped scientific progress, this made a deeply unequal society seem natural, like it was just biology, not the result of deliberate legal and economic decisions. And this whole line of thinking, it led to its absolute ugliest conclusion with the eugenics movement. This was literally a project to control human breeding. The goal they stated out loud was to get rid of undesirable traits and stop what they terrifyingly called race suicide. And they planned to do it by controlling who got to have kids and who didn't.
Okay, on to the genetic revelation, and how the Human Genome Project gave us the real answer. You know, for centuries, these totally baseless ideas just stuck around. The lines that law drew and pseudoscience tried to justify, they seemed set in stone. But a brand new scientific revolution was coming, and it was about to change everything.
So, imagine this. What if we could finally stop all this nonsense about measuring skulls? What if we could actually read the entire instruction manual for a human being, our DNA, and just get the truth, once and for all?
Well, that was the incredibly audacious goal of the Human Genome Project. Kicked off in 1990, this thing was one of the biggest, most ambitious scientific projects in human history. The mission was simple to say, but unbelievably hard to do. Map out every single gene in our DNA and crack our fundamental genetic code. And when they finally finished it in 2003, the result was like a knockout punch to all that old scientific racism. It proved, definitively, that there is no genetic basis for race. That's it. We are all, every single one of us, 99.9% the same.
So, that brings us to the echoes of eugenics today. How the ghost of eugenics is still haunting modern genetic science. You'd think that'd be the end of the story, right? Case closed. Well, not quite. Because even though the science behind race was totally debunked, the idea of trying to improve humanity through genetics, that didn't go away. It's like the ghost of eugenics just found some new high-tech toys to play with.
Think about it like this. The old eugenics was all about the government, about forced sterilization and this obsession with racial purity. This potential new eugenics looks totally different on the surface. Now it's about consumer choice, incredible gene editing technologies, and this possibility of creating designer babies, kids whose genes are picked out to make them smarter or more athletic. The core idea of improving humans is still there. It's just shifted from the government forcing it on you to the free market selling it to you.
And this just opens up a whole Pandora's box of really tough ethical questions. I mean, could your DNA be used against you by your boss or your insurance company? Is that a new kind of discrimination? And what do we do about the fact that a scientist has already created the world's first gene-edited babies? That line has been crossed. Is this where we're headed? A future like in the movie Gattaca, where your DNA basically decides your entire life before you even get to live it?
The power we're talking about is just immense. And some really important scientists, people like James Watson, one of the guys who discovered DNA's structure and helped start the Human Genome Project, have actually argued that we have to use this power. He made this really controversial statement that it's our job to rescue people from what he called genetic hell.
So, all of this leaves us with a really deep question for our future. For centuries, science was misused to divide us and to say some people were worth less than others. Now, we have the power to literally change our own biology. So the question is, just because we can design better humans, does that mean we should? Thank you for tuning in.